Mr. Anthony, it gets a little more wonderful now. So we've got a question for you. The question is,
Sure.
you've had the best of both worlds from being at IBM USA to IBM India. But according to Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara, we would love to know what, according to you, makes IBM India a notch above the IBMs from anywhere in the world.
Oh, a lot to say about IBM India. When I came here, moved back to IBM India about 10 years ago now, time flies. I was not sure what to expect, right? But IBM India at that time was very young. A lot of young minds in IBM India. The industry was evolving. The IBM India itself was evolving. So it was quite thrilling to move from a very mature economy, very mature IBM US to IBM India, which was still growing, and be part of that growth and exciting part of that phase of IBM India.
Fantastic answer, Mr. Anthony. I can see you get very nostalgic just hearing your hearing about India. It seems like you've missed India a lot, and we're so happy to have you back. Thank you so very much, Mr. Anthony. What a pleasure to have you. Stage is all yours.
Thanks, Nikita. Let me share my screen. Today, what I'm going to talk about is, why Oracle on IBM LinuxONE. And I put this together after, spending a lot of time with many customers here in India and also outside of India, right? I cover the APAC region as well. So a lot of countries in Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, so on, right? So, and wanted to bring this platform and introduce this platform to you all to say why we should adopt this platform, why the financial sector should adopt this platform to host their Oracle workloads, right? So let's go ahead, right? We all know Oracle. I mean, I don't have to introduce Oracle to you all. So here, let's hear what IBM LinuxONE is, right? Many of you are probably not aware of this, know about this IBM LinuxONE server. But what it is an enterprise class server from IBM, right, to host or run Linux workloads. That's the plain and simple one sentence way to introduce this platform, right? It runs Linux only and nothing else, right? So it cannot run HPUX, it cannot run Windows, it cannot run Solaris, or even Oracle Linux, right? Though it says Linux in its term, it's not really open, it's proprietary, it's not open source. So it runs open source versions of Linux, right? So Linux from Red Hat, Linux from SUSE or Ubuntu or any other community supported versions of Linux operating systems. So any other distros, right? There is no IBM Linux. IBM does not make a Linux to run on this server. You have to procure the Linux operating system from one of these vendors or get the Linux distro from the community that you're interested in and then run it on this server, right? So it's a completely open platform. The second thing I want to say is it is, a very powerful server. It has the fastest commercial processor that's available right now, right? It runs at 5.2 gigahertz clock speed, and does a lot of work within a short period of time. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through this presentation. Huge scalability, so you can go up to 190 cores, and you may think that, oh, 190 cores, I can buy a couple of Intel servers, and what's so great about it? But these 190 cores are equivalent to about 2,000 cores of your gold or platinum Xeon x86 processors, right? So it packs in a lot of power, and it can scale up to 40 terabytes of, I know it's not a spelling mistake here, it is RAM memory, just like you have RAID in disks for storage, this is RAID for memory, right? So it's the same concept. So you have extra memory to take care of memory failures, just like you would take care of disk failures and data loss prevention in RAID. This is what the server does in RAM, right? It's fully virtualized from ground up, right? So it comes with its own virtualization layer. It's built into the firmware. You cannot take it out of the server, right? So from ground up, it is virtualized. The first thing you do on the server is to create a virtual server and then load your operating system and then your applications and so on. So it's completely virtualized. You cannot get this as in a bare metal server, right? But on top of that, you can run other hypervisors, KVM, for example, from Linux, or IBM has ZVM or ZVM hypervisors. You can run that on top of the LPAR that was created with this firmware hypervisor. And you can also run modern containers, Linux containers, right? Docker, manage it with Kubernetes or Red Hat OpenShift, etc. So it's a very modern, highly virtualized, cloud-ready server. And it doesn't stop there, right? It has got encryption coprocessors. So with each core in the system, right? So it's got a dedicated coprocessor, which enables you to encrypt at very high speeds. It's a very high performant piece of hardware coprocessor that allows for multiple algorithms, right? Encryption, decryption algorithms that are commonly available out there. And what that allows you is to encrypt everything. I mean, if you listen to what Suresh was saying in the previous panel discussion, one way to secure your enterprise is to encrypt everything, right? Whether it's data at rest, data in motion, or data in use, right? Encrypt everything. And because the overhead of encryption is so low with this encryption coprocessor, you can encrypt everything, right? It's possible to do that. Similarly, you have on-chip compression accelerator, right? High bandwidth compression, really fast. It's 42 times faster than your software-based encryption, right? So if you want to compress something before you send it off to your SAN storage, your fiber channel network, you can encrypt that at 42 times faster than you would do with any kind of software compression libraries that are out there using this accelerator, right? And it does that automatically for you. It's not that you write extra code to get this done. It knows that you're doing a compression using gzip or your zip algorithms, and it pushes it off to this accelerator and it does the compression for you. And of course, as I said before, it supports all of the open source and many of the COTS middleware and applications. A lot of ISV vendors support this platform, including Oracle, of course, which is the topic of this session. And all of this is packed in a 19-inch rack form factor. So it can roll into your data center without any disruption, without any change in form factors or anything, right? So just rolls into your rack space allocated for it, and you can get going as quickly as possible. I know this is a busy chart, a lot of data in it, but I want to focus on just 3 elements, maybe 4 elements on this, right? As I mentioned before, it is the world's most secure server that's out there. You can protect 100% of your data, along with, because of this encryption, built-in encryption coprocessors, and also some of the other HFSIMs that are available in it that operate at very high levels of security, right? That's a topic in itself, so I'll leave it there. Secondly, the server is the most reliable server out there, right? And I'm not saying this because I am part of this team and so on. This is validated by many surveys out there, by many independent analysts, that shows that this server has not had unplanned downtime for many years running, right? And we have seen this in the field. So it does not go down. There's no unplanned downtime, or the unplanned downtimes, whatever that may happen, is converted into planned downtimes. Okay, so highly reliable server with zero downtime, so you don't lose your sleep over whether the server is going to fail or not. The third thing is, the capacity is so high on these servers, the performance is so high of these processors built into these servers that each core of the server can run about 13 times. I say about, I know I'm using some weasel words here, but 13 times 13 cores equivalent work of an x86 processor, right? And this varies, so you can go low or high, and you'll see some of the cases that I'm going to present later on. We'll see that that number is just about, or you can have really high consolidation ratios when you're consolidating workloads onto the server. And all of this at, again, 40% lower or higher total cost of ownership, right? You can achieve much higher savings by deploying workloads on the server, right? And 13x is a very big number, right? When you're saying that you can run, the one core on the server can perform the work of, or can perform at 13 times, 13 cores of x86. Well, how is that even possible? Is it really that, is it really possible to do that on the server? And the first thing I have to say is, I've mentioned this before, it has got really fast processor running at 5.2 megahertz. Not only that, it's got 4 levels of cache. Unlike x86, you only have 3 levels of cache, and the amount of cache that's there in this processor is at least 8 times or more, right, at each level. So that itself will give you 2 to 3 times better performance per core on the server. A lot of the I/O automatically is offloaded to other processors that are built into this server, right? So there are system access processors in the server that would take care of all of your I/O. So any I/O that comes in to retrieve data or go to your network ports or SAN ports to retrieve data, all of those operations are offloaded. So your processor is free to just do compute, right? And there's in-memory communications across VMs, which we call hypersockets, that would let bypass all of this networking that has to go out of the server and come back into the server. All of that is done in memory. The workload management and CPU utilization on the server is very different from what you would see on x86. These servers are meant to run at very high utilization. So you give it some work, the first thing it tries to do is try to complete this as fast as possible, right, with the resources that it has. And if it means that it has to run at 90%, 100% utilization, it will do it, but its task is to perform that operation in the least amount of time possible. And you can have sustained CPU utilization. This is not just peaks. You can run this server at those kind of levels of utilization for prolonged period of time, for hours on end, right? Which is not really possible on your typical x86 servers. For HA, because of its high reliability, you don't need additional cores for your, for HA instances, or you can allocate fewer cores for your HA instances. And these are all pooled resources. So, you can benefit from that pooling process to reduce the number of cores on the server for the same amount of work to do, or to do your HA. And then disaster recovery, the same thing. You can use CBU cores that are in an active course that gets activated automatically once a DR is called on your DR system. And then the architecture of this server is fundamentally different also. The underlying principles of it is very different from your x86, typical x86 architecture. Everything is shared across all LPARs, all VMs. So you can consolidate a lot of workloads on the single server, and you can get huge consolidation benefits by running all of those workloads on a single server, right? So it shares the compute, it shares the memory, it shares the IO, which means that if any one of those workloads running in a VM is stopped for resources, this, it borrows it from the neighboring VMs and tries to get that done. Okay. But so what? You have fewer cores, so what? And here, the thing is, like most software, Oracle software being one, they're licensed by the cores, right? The number of cores that software is running on. So if you reduce the number of cores required, you directly impact the software costs, right? So reduce the cores, you significantly reduce the number of licenses required, and hence reduce the software costs. So here's an example, right? So we have a small x86 environment with 24 cores of production in DC, non-production of 24, same size in DC, and production of same size at DR. So requires 72 cores, which means that you need 36 Oracle licenses, right? Because the core factor of Oracle, if you're familiar with the core factor concept, you just need one license for every 2 cores on x86. If you convert this into LinuxONE using your standard sizing tools that we use here in IBM, you just need a total of 8 licenses, right? So significant reduction. So you're already down by, you already save on 27 licenses, Oracle licenses, even in the small environment. And Oracle is not cheap. So if you apply a 70% discount on the Oracle DB and some of the common components like RAC and Partition Manager and the diagnostic tools and so on, it's $31,000 per core. That's a discounted price. And then you tack on an annual SNS of 22%. So what you see, is that what you get is for 27 licenses, you would have paid $1.8 million. And that's a saving, right? So because that's a reduction in licenses. Or it's 13 crores, right? 13.5 crores or so. By just deploying the small workload on LinuxONE, you would save about 13 crores on just software licenses, right? But in addition to that saving in software licenses, you're getting a much higher, reliable, available, serviceable, and secure system to run that workload, right? So just don't focus on, while focusing on IT costs is good, focus on the other aspects, the other ETs of the server as well. You can deploy, there are lots of deployment options for Oracle on the server. Like I said, the server is meant to be virtualized. Virtualization is built ground up on the server, so you can have dedicated LPAR on which you can run Linux, which can host an Oracle DB. If you want, you can go further. You can virtualize that LPAR like the level 2, as you see in level 2. You can run multiple hypervisors on top of this LPAR, and then put Oracle, Postgres, or any other databases or any other workloads you want on it, right? Unlike other servers, you segregate database from application or one database type from another database type and so on. Here you can run everything on the same server. If you look at Oracle Exadata, you can only run Oracle database on it. You can run nothing else, right? So here you can run not just Oracle databases, but you can run anything on the server with very high levels of isolation and performance between these LPARs. You can also run containers, right? You can carve out an LPAR and then run containers, Docker containers, manage them with Kubernetes or OpenShift on it, right? And all of these can run together with, without interacting or impacting each other in terms of performance or crosstalk or noisy neighbor effects and so on, right? So you can run all of these things on the same. And the good thing is Oracle recognizes these LPARs as hard partitioning technology, virtualization technology, which means that you only need to license those cores that are allocated to that LPAR on which Oracle is running, right? So subcapacity licensing is possible on the server. So you don't have to pay licenses for the entire server. You just pay for what you use for Oracle, what is assigned, the capacity, what capacity is assigned for Oracle, all right? And this was a survey done by Rimini Street research analysts at Rimini Street. They were asking, these large enterprises like yourself, what are your top 3 mission critical priorities? And 2/3 of the people, surveyed enterprises said they would like to reduce the cost, right? Of course, there are other priorities in that, but the top one was reducing cost of their IT infrastructure, right? And of those people, when you ask the next follow-on question, are you currently reducing, or what are you going to do about your Oracle costs? 53% said they're going to spend trying to reduce or already, reducing cost of Oracle in their enterprise, right? So this is a big focus area for a lot of the IT managers, a lot of the CFOs, a lot of these C-suite executives like yourself, right, that are on this call. So it's a big thing on their mind to reduce this cost. And that's where LinuxONE comes in. The next 3 charts, I'll go through 3 case studies. One is a small, infrastructure based in India, a government financial institution that we put the LinuxONE in recently. And basically they were, it was a mix of HP Superdomes and other HP servers. And they needed to save on Oracle costs and they wanted to get a more modern infrastructure, right? So we took 154 servers across 3 sites, running 875 cores across them, and put them on 3 Linux servers, one at each data center, DR and DR and DR. Reduce that 437 cores into just 57 LinuxONE cores, right? And it's deployed, it runs beautifully, and one of the application team members, leads over there, was testing some performance, and he realized that an application that required 42 HP's Superdome cores, right, was moved to 2 cores of LinuxONE, and it still achieved 3x throughput. How wonderful is that, right? And then here's a second study. This is the one that I did in Indonesia. It's medium-sized, I would say. Again, it's a 2-site solution, 30 physical servers, lot of cores. I mean, these are big servers that they were using. And, again, reduced these things into 3 LinuxONE servers and reduced Oracle licenses from 855 to 121. And the thing is, right, they have a EULA with Oracle, right? And they're about to renew their EULA, and they were wondering how they're going to come up with the money to pay that EULA at the end of the current licensing term, right? And they deployed all of those workloads on it, and they didn't have to, renew the EULA. They terminated the EULA, bought all the licenses, and they still saved, $13 million or so on this, right? By not renewing the EULA. So a wonderful story. And the third one is a very large infrastructure. It's still ongoing, right? Aging infrastructure. They had mix of servers, mostly Spark from about 7-8 years ago, 10 years ago. They had no idea what kind of servers existed in their data center, right? They couldn't even get the inventory of these servers. They were finding it difficult to manage it. And they wanted to simplify it. And there was also a mandate from the Australian government to reduce their energy consumption, to reduce their carbon footprint. They were running out of space, data center space. They were, borrowing space from other data centers to host these servers. And it was a complete total mess, right? And we came in and we did a study for them. And we showed them that by deploying all of those servers on 5 servers, right, in 3 data centers, they could, reduce their annual CO2 by 5,000 tons, sorry, reduce their Oracle licenses by 2,600, go down by the number of racks. So you're just using 5 racks, right, on LinuxONE instead of 102 server racks, and then reduce the networking costs and save, and in that process, additionally save 82 million Australian dollars over 5 years, right? So this is a big story, right? I know, such large environments may not exist in your IT, landscape, but something to show that what the server is capable of doing. Final thoughts, you can read this, but, whenever you think of IT costs and increasing IT costs, are you up on your ULA renewal? What do you do about it, right? How do you get that thing down? Can you update your infrastructure or be able to grow your infrastructure without any downtime, right? So can you add capacity without, bringing in more servers, racking and stacking and powering up and networking and all of that, right? Can you easily grow your infrastructure by just activating a few additional cores for the new workloads that has come in, or the growth that you anticipate in a few months? Do you have to go through procurement again and go through all of that process, right? Are you running out of space in your data center, right? Which is a big concern and for many of the enterprises here in Mumbai, right, where data center costs are, skyrocketing. So think about these things, right? Is your platform, are the servers that you're using ready for microservices-based architecture? A lot of ISVs that we talk to now are re-architecting their monolithic VM-based architectures into microservices, containerized applications, right? So are you ready? Is your IT infrastructure ready to handle that, to accommodate that, right? And how about security and privacy? Are you concerned about that? How to secure data and protect the privacy of your customers, on which the data resides, right? So if those are your concerns and you want to save some money and then get some reliable service, I would strongly recommend you to take a look at IBM LinuxONE. And thanks for the time. Thank you for listening.